Well, hello there, and welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we're doing something really unique, actually. It's born right out of our listener community.
That's right. We've got Brad Barfield from Ashley County now.
Yeah, and he took it upon himself to build something pretty incredible, the ACN History GPT.
Mm-hmm. A custom AI focused just on Ashley County history.
And get this, he sent us a screen recording, 24 minutes and 34 seconds long, showing him interacting with it.
Really digging in deep.
Totally. He's been feeding it just a massive amount of local history sources. So our plan for this deep dive is to kind of explore the historical context that bubbled up during his interaction.
Exactly. We're using the themes he explored, the questions he asked the GPT, and the answers that surfaced from all those sources he's been loading in.
It's a great way to see how these new tools can help us explore the past, right?
Absolutely. Brad's work isn't just, a tech project. It really highlights how rich Ashley County's heritage is.
So our mission today, basically take the key threads from Brad's screen recording.
The history the GPT pulled up.
And sort of give you a shortcut to understanding some really interesting bits of the county's story, all sparked by his curiosity.
We've got historical accounts, anecdotes, maybe some local lore mixed in, a good range of stuff.
Yeah, and noting Brad's enthusiasm from that recording, I agree with his sign-off on it. This ought to be fun.
Definitely. So where should we start? Looking at Brad's interaction, Crossett obviously looms large.
Right, the genesis of Crossett and, well, forestry. That seems like the natural starting point.
It really is. You can't talk about Crossett without talking about Cap Gates and the Crossett Lumber Company arriving in 1899.
That was the spark, wasn't it? The founding moment for the town itself.
Absolutely. And that initial period, the axe boom, as they called it.
An axe boom.
Yeah.
Sounds intense. Just cutting down virgin timber.
Pretty much. It was rapid harvesting. That's literally what built the town initially, created the whole community fabric.
Okay, a town built by axes. But the interesting thing, and this came up in Brad's exploration too, is that it wasn't just chop it all down and leave.
No, not at all. Fairly quickly, actually, there was a shift. People like Cap Gates and later foresters like R.R. Reynolds started thinking more long-term.
Towards sustainable forestry. That feels pretty forward-thinking for, like, the early 1900s.
Really was a big departure from the standard cut-and-run mentality back then. And a key moment was establishing the Crossett Experimental Forest.
When was that?
1933. That became, as the sources put it, a living laboratory.
A living laboratory. I like that.
Yeah, they started scientifically studying how to manage the forests. That's where silviculture really took root there.
Okay. Silviculture. Sounds technical. Break that down for us. What did that actually look like, on the ground in Crossett?
Sure. So silviculture is basically managing forests for health and growth. In Crossett, they started doing specific things. Selective thinning, for example.
Taking out weaker trees so the good ones grow better?
Exactly. Give the strong ones more room, more resources. They also looked at even-aged versus uneven-aged management.
Different ways to structure the forest over time.
Right. And each has different results, ecologically and economically.
So it wasn't just taking, it was shaping. What else?
Well, understanding natural regeneration was huge, how trees reseed themselves.
Yeah.
And they used prescribed burning.
Controlled fires.
Yeah, controlled fire to clear out underbrush, reduce bigger fire risks, and actually help certain trees like pine regenerate.
Interesting. And I guess planting too?
Oh, yeah. Site preparation and planting seedlings where natural regeneration wasn't cutting it.
It really sounds like Crossett transformed itself from that initial axe boom
to a center for sustainable forestry. It became a symbol of it, really.
So how did all this focus on silviculture?
Yeah.
How did that ripple out beyond just the trees? Did it change the town itself?
Oh, absolutely. It got woven into everything. Education, for instance. As the town prospered from managing the forests well, schools grew.
Makes sense.
And much later, you see Georgia Pacific donating land for Forest Echo's vocational technical school. That's a direct link, right? Training people for the industry.
Wow. And didn't you mention Yale?
Yeah. Yale University ran a summer forestry camp in Crossett for years. That tells you something about Crossett's reputation in the field. Yale, right there in Ashley County.
That's incredible. So when the initial big timber rush inevitably slowed down,
silviculture basically saved and transformed the economy. It created new kinds of jobs.
not just cutting, but managing, researching.
Exactly. Forest management, research, conservation work. The Crossett Company even set up 11 forestry districts, each with its own team.
11 districts? Wow.
And logging changed, too. Trucks started replacing railroads. They built gravel roads to get timber out.
So daily life must have become really tied to the rhythm of the forest growing, not just the mill running.
Very much so. You felt that connection. The company invested in housing, helped fund community stuff like churches, parks.
Like a whole ecosystem,
Yeah.
socially and economically.
Right. And even conservation education in schools, it built this shared identity rooted in the pines.
Okay, so we have the axe boom, that is really interesting green boom with sustainable practices. Now, Brad's GPT dive also pointed to a third one, the paper boom. And there was a date correction there.
Yes, that's important. Sometimes you see maybe 1928 floated for the paper boom start.
But that's not quite right.
The key date, the one that Brad's exploration likely clarified, is March 17th, 1937.
Okay, March 17th, 37. What happened then?
That's when the Crossett paper mill officially opened. Huge expansion, using southern pine for large-scale papermaking.
Right, using the leftovers, the chips and stuff from the lumber mills.
Pretty much. Turning waste into a valuable product, it was a massive boost, created a whole different sector of jobs.
Chemical engineers, machine operators,
Yeah.
different skills needed.
Totally different skill set. But even before the paper mill, there was another piece, back in 1930.
What was that?
The Crossett Chemical Company, sometimes overlooked, but really important for using everything. They took lower-grade hardwoods, stuff not great for lumber, and turned it into charcoal, wood alcohol, turpentine,
Wow.
even glacial acidic acid and tall oil, which is a byproduct used in making soaps and other things.
So, truly, using every part of the tree, even the less valuable stuff, that's remarkably innovative.
It was incredibly resourceful.
Okay. Now, it looks like Brad's exploration with the GPT then kind of shifted gears,
Right.
moving north from Crossett towards Fountain Hill.
Right. Fountain Hill is a different story altogether, an older settlement.
Older. How so?
Well, unlike Crossett, which was, a company town built for industry,
Right. Planned.
Fountain Hill grew more organically, around natural springs, up on a ridge, and it has a pretty significant claim to fame.
Which is?
It was the first county seat of Ashley County, way back in 1848.
1848. So long before Crossett even existed. Completely different origins.
Completely different.
But it still got tied into the timber economy eventually, didn't it? Even without big mills.
Oh, yeah. When the railroads came through in the early 1900s, the Crossett Railway, the 80 and N.
Ashley drew a northern.
Right. Those gave Fountain Hill a connection. People in the area did smaller scale logging, shipped timber out on the rails to Crossett or elsewhere. More distributed,
Gotcha. And education seemed really central to Fountain Hill's identity, even early on.
That's definitely a theme that comes through. Even as a smaller rural place, they put a real emphasis on schools. You see consolidation of smaller schools later on.
Trying to provide better opportunities.
Exactly. There's even a quote from a 1919 school board meeting about preparing kids for any college or university. Shows real aspiration.
That's impressive. And you can't talk about Fountain Hill without mentioning the church, right? Flat Creek Baptist.
Absolutely. Founded in 1845. Think about that. Before the county was even officially formed.
Wow.
It's one of the oldest churches in the whole area. Really speaks to those deep community roots, faith, family, connection to the land. A different vibe than industrial Crossett.
Definitely paints a picture of strong heritage, deep roots there.
A real legacy place.
Okay, so after Fountain Hill, Brad's GPT interaction seems to have swung towards Hamburg, the current county seat. And the contrast with Crossett is pretty stark there, too.
Yeah, very different again. Hamburg was established as the county seat in 1849, incorporated 1856. It was designed for governance.
How so?
Look at the layout, planned around the courthouse square. Its whole reason for being was administrative, civic life.
Whereas Crossett was engineered for lumber and industry.
Exactly. Hamburg was about law, county business, and the geography played a role, too. The GPT mentioned Chaminahop Bayou.
Yeah, how did that affect things?
Well, the Chaminahop floods sometimes. It could act as a bit of a barrier, maybe made Hamburg a bit more self-contained historically compared to Crossett, which needed those reliable transportation links for industry.
Interesting. So two distinct centers, different raison d'etre, shaped by planning and landscape, but obviously interdependent within the county.
Precisely.
Now, this is where Brad's GPT dive got really granular, uncovering some specific, kind of fun local details, including something in an old school binder.
Yes, that's great. Brad found his own name listed as Bros Barfield in the 1990 Fountain Hill High School class roster.
Ross Barfield.
It's a perfect example of those little human errors, the quirks you find in old records. Endearing, really.
Totally. A personal connection. And that seemed to lead into looking at the 1970s in Ashley County more broadly. What was that decade like?
It seems like a time of Steady growth and transition. The timber industry was still king, Georgia Pacific expanding ongoing research at the experimental forest.
Still the economic engine.
Definitely. And school consolidation was still happening, merging smaller districts. And vocational training became more prominent, like with Forest Echoes opening.
Reflecting the need for skilled workers in forestry and related trades.
Exactly. And community traditions seem to be really cementing themselves then, too, like the Armadillo Festival in Hamburg starting up.
Building local identity. Now, there was a clarification about the main newspaper back then. It wasn't the Eagle.
Right. Easy mistake to make, thinking the Ashley County Eagle ran all through the 20th century. But it actually stopped publishing way back in 1914.
Oh, wow. What happened?
A fire destroyed its archives, tragically. So for the mid-20th century, including the 70s, the key paper was the Ashley County Ledger out of Hamburg.
Good clarification. That's why local historical societies and folks like Brad doing this work are so vital getting those details right.
Absolutely.
The GPP then brought up a place called Berlin, a vanished town.
Yeah, Berlin. It's a fascinating, kind of poignant story. It was an actual small town, mid-19th century.
What is it like?
Had tradespeople, merchants, farmers, located on the Hamburg-Bastrop Road. But like a lot of small places back then.
Just faded away.
Pretty much. The Civil War caused disruption, then other towns grew, transportation routes shifted, and Berlin just sort of disappeared over time.
A ghost town almost.
Yeah.
And speaking of the past, there was a story about a duel near Berlin.
Yes. A duel at Honeycutt Ford. Probably post-Civil War era.
A real duel.
Yeah.
With guns.
Apparently so. It really highlights how important personal honor or reputation was back then. Involved a wheelwright and a blacksmith, the story goes.
Wow. And they chose a spot near the state line?
Reportedly, yeah. Maybe to try and avoid local prosecution if things went badly. Adds another layer to it.
Intense. Then there was a darker story. A killing at Denson's store in Fountain Hill.
Yes, the death of Marion Pye Thurman in 1918. It's a sad story. Shows conflict could happen even in tight-knit places.
And there's mystery around it.
Yeah, conflicting accounts of what happened. And supposedly the graves of Thurman and the person acquitted for his death were never found. Leaves it feeling unresolved.
And Crossett wasn't immune to violence either, especially early on. A shootout at the Mercantile.
That's right. An account of a gunfight right in the main company store. A reminder that even in a planned town, it could still be rough and tumble in the early days.
Definitely. Now, shifting back to the founding figures, the GPT mentioned the city's mothers and fathers buried in the old Crossett Cemetery.
Yeah, the founders. People like Cap Gates, Charles W. Gates, Dr. Watsek, E.S. Crossett himself.
They sound like a determined bunch.
Absolutely. Pioneers, really. Built a town from scratch pretty quickly. Their stories are all about vision, hard work, resilience.
It wasn't just the top guys.
Right.
What about the logging camp bosses? They must have been important figures out in the woods.
Oh, hugely important. Men like George Ritchie, Clint Dunnigan, John Duncan. They ran the camps, managed big crews, kept the timber flowing, often in tough conditions.
Camps were even named after them.
Often, yeah. Shows their authority. And Duncan Camp being near Fountain Hill is an interesting link back to our earlier discussion.
Ties things together.
Okay.
Nearly there. Brad's exploration also touched on the bayou towns in the Delta Wilmot, Parkdale, Portland.
Right, down along Bayou Bartholomew. Their history is different again, more tied to agriculture and the river.
Not so much timber.
Less dominant, anyway. The delta soil was fertile, so farming, especially cotton, was huge. River transport was key. Their story is more about agriculture, floods, river life, different challenges like big fires that hit some of those towns.
Makes sense. And finally, Brad brought up this really interesting idea of 2 levels of townships, with names like Bear House, Egypt, and the Townhouse.
Yeah, that's digging into a deeper layer of local organization, probably predating formal government lines. These were community areas.
Like informal neighborhoods or districts?
Sort of, with their own distinct names, often based on settlers or land features. And the townhouse wasn't necessarily a house, but like a central community spot, a meeting place, social center.
Fascinating, like a folk geography underneath the affiliated maps.
Exactly. Shows how communities organize themselves organically. Bear House, Egypt, Marie Celine, Carter, Longview, White. These names hold old stories.
It really rounds out the picture. So much history layered together. Well, this has been just fantastic. A real deep dive, and all kicked off by K. Brad Barfield in his ACN History GPT project.
It's amazing how much history is packed into Ashley County. Brad's curiosity, using that GPT, gave us a great way to look at how forestry, community, individual lives, geography, how it all weaves together.
Yeah, you really see how the past isn't even past, is it? It's still shaping things today.
Absolutely. And his work is a perfect example of how engaging with local history keeps it alive.
Makes you wonder what else is waiting in those sources he's collecting or just in people's memories. Maybe we need another deep dive on, say, just the Bayou towns or something.
Could be. There's definitely more to explore.
Well, a huge thank you again to K. Brad Barfield for sparking this whole conversation with his GPT project and sharing his exploration. And thanks to you, our listener. We really appreciate spending this time with you, exploring this piece of Arkansas history.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.